Chapter 1. Joseph, Part 10 of the Legends of the Jews, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Stephen Escalera. The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. The Ruler of Egypt. Now Joseph reaped the harvest of his virtues, and according to the measure of his merits God granted him reward. The mouth that refused the kiss of unlawful passion and sin received the kiss of homage from the people. The neck that did not bow itself unto sin was adorned with the gold chain that Pharaoh put upon it. The hands that did not touch sin wore the signet ring that Pharaoh took from his own hand and put upon Joseph's. The body that did not come in contact with sin was arrayed in vestures of byssus. The feet that made no steps in the direction of sin reposed in the royal chariot, and the thoughts that kept themselves undefiled by sin were proclaimed as wisdom. Joseph was installed in his high position and invested with the insignia of his office, with solemn ceremony. The king took off his signet ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in princely apparel, and set a gold crown upon his head, and laid a gold chain about his neck. Then he commanded his servants to make Joseph to ride in his second chariot, which went by the side of the chariot wherein sat the king, and he also made him to ride upon a great and strong horse of the king's horses, and his servants conducted him through the streets of the city of Egypt. Musicians, no less than 1,000 striking cymbals, and 1,000 blowing flutes, and 5,000 men with drawn swords gleaming in the air formed the vanguard. 20,000 of the king's grandees, girt with gold-embroidered leather belts, marched at the right of Joseph, and as many at the left of him. The women and the maidens of the nobility looked out of the windows to gaze upon Joseph's beauty, and they poured down chains upon him, and rings and jewels, that he might but direct his eyes toward them. Yet he did not look up, and as a reward God made him proof against the evil eye, nor has it ever had the power of inflicting harm upon any of his descendants. Servants of the king, preceding him and following him, burnt incense upon his path, and cassia, and all manner of sweet spices, and strewed myrrh and aloes wherever he went. 20 heralds walked before him, and they proclaimed, "This is the man whom the king hath chosen to be the second after him. All the affairs of state will be administered by him, and whoever resisteth his commands, or refuseth to bow down to the ground before him, he will die the death of the rebel against the king and the king's deputy." Without delay the people prostrated themselves, and they cried, "Long live the king, and long live the deputy of the king!" And Joseph, looking down from his horse upon the people and their exultation, exclaimed, his eyes directed heavenward, "The Lord raiseth up the poor out of the dust, and lifteth up the needy from the dunghill. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the man that trusteth in thee." After Joseph, accompanied by Pharaoh's officers and princes, had journeyed through the whole city of Egypt, and had viewed all there was therein, he returned to the king on the selfsame day, and the king gave him fields and vineyards as a present, and also 3,000 talents of silver, and 1,000 talents of gold, and onyx stones, and bdellium, and many other costly things. The king commanded, moreover, that every Egyptian give Joseph a gift, else he would be put to death. A platform was erected in the open street, and there all deposited their presents, and among the things were many of gold and silver, as well as precious stones, carried thither by the people and also the grandees, for they saw that Joseph enjoyed the favor of the king. Furthermore, Joseph received 100 slaves from Pharaoh, and they were to do all his bidding, and he himself acquired many more, for he resided in a spacious palace. 3 years it took to build it. Special magnificence was lavished upon the hall of state, which was his audience chamber, and upon the throne fashioned of gold and silver, and inlaid with precious stones, whereon there was the representation of the whole land of Egypt and of the river Nile. And as Joseph multiplied in riches, so he increased also in wisdom, for God added to his wisdom that all might love and honor him. Pharaoh called him Zephanath-paneah, he who can reveal secret things with ease, and rejoiceth the heart of man therewith. Each letter of the name Zephanath-paneah has a meaning too. The first, Zede, stands for Zophah, seer; Pe, for Poda, redeemer; Nun, for Nabai, prophet; Ta, for Tomek, supporter; Pe, for Poter, interpreter of dreams; Ain, for Arum, clever; Nun, for Nabon, discreet; and Het, for Hakam, wise. The name of Joseph's wife pointed to her history in the same way. Asenath was the daughter of Dinah and Hamor, but she was abandoned at the borders of Egypt, only, that people might know who she was, Jacob engraved the story of her parentage and her birth upon a gold plate fastened around her neck. The day on which Asenath was exposed, Potiphar went walking with his servants near the city wall, and they heard the voice of a child. At the captain's bidding, they brought the baby to him, and when he read her history from the gold plate, he determined to adopt her. He took her home with him, and raised her as his daughter. The Aleph in Asenath stands for On, where Potiphar was priest; the Samek for Sitera, hidden, for she was kept concealed on account of her extraordinary beauty; the Nun for Nohemet, for she wept and entreated that she might be delivered from the house of the heathen Potiphar; and the Ta for Tamah, the perfect one, on account of her pious, perfect deeds. Asenath had saved Joseph's life while she was still an infant in arms. When Joseph was accused of immoral conduct by Potiphar's wife and the other women, and his master was on the point of having him hanged, Asenath approached her foster father, and she assured him under oath that the charge against Joseph was false. Then spake God, As thou livest, because thou didst try to defend Joseph, thou shalt be the woman to bear the tribes that he is appointed to beget. Asenath bore him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, during the 7 years of plenty, for in the time of famine Joseph refrained from all indulgence in the pleasures of life. They were bred in chastity and fear of God by their father, and they were wise and well instructed in all knowledge and in the affairs of state, so that they became the favorites of the court and were educated with the royal princes. Before the famine broke over the land, Joseph found an opportunity of rendering the king a great service. He equipped an army of 4,600 men, providing all the soldiers with shields and spears and bucklers and helmets and slings. With this army, and aided by the servants and officers of the king, and by the people of Egypt, he carried on a war with Tarshish in the 1st year after his appointment as viceroy. The people of Tarshish had invaded the territory of the Ishmaelites, and the latter, few in number at that time, were sore pressed, and applied to the king of Egypt for help against their enemies. At the head of his host of heroes, Joseph marched to the land of Havilah, where he was joined by the Ishmaelites, and with united forces they fought against the people of Tarshish, routed them utterly, settled their land with the Ishmaelites, while the defeated men took refuge with their brethren in Javan. Joseph and his army returned to Egypt, and not a man had they lost. In a little while Joseph's prophecy was confirmed. That year and the 6 following years were years of plenty, as he had foretold. The harvest was so ample that a single ear produced 2 heaps of grain, and Joseph made circumspect arrangements to provide abundantly for the years of famine. He gathered up all the grain, and in the cities situated in the middle of each district he laid up the produce from round about, and had ashes and earth strewn on the garnered food from the very soil on which it had been grown. Also he preserved the grain in the ear, all these being precautions taken to guard against rot and mildew. The inhabitants of Egypt also tried, on their own account, to put aside a portion of the superabundant harvest of the 7 fruitful years against the need of the future. But when the grievous time of dearth came, and they went to their storehouses to bring forth the treasured grain, behold, it had rotted, and become unfit for food. The famine broke in upon the people with such suddenness, that the bread gave out unexpectedly as they sat at their tables. They had not even a bite of bran bread. Thus they were driven to apply to Joseph, and beseech his help, And he admonished them, saying, Give up your allegiance to these deceitful idols, and say, Blessed is he who giveth bread unto all flesh. But they refused to deny their lying gods, and they betook themselves to Pharaoh, only to be told by him, Go unto Joseph. What he saith to you, do. For this Pharaoh was rewarded. God granted him long life and a long reign, until he became arrogant, and well-merited punishment overtook him. When the Egyptians approached Joseph with the petition for bread, he spoke, saying, I give no food to the uncircumcised. Go hence and circumcise yourselves, and then return hither. They entered the presence of Pharaoh and complained to him regarding Joseph, but he said as before, Go unto Joseph. And they replied, We come from Joseph, and he hath spoken roughly unto us, saying, Go hence and circumcise yourselves. We warned thee in the beginning that he is a Hebrew, and would treat us in such wise. Pharaoh said to them, O ye fools, did he not prophesy through the Holy Spirit, and proclaim to the whole world, that there would come 7 years of plenty to be followed by 7 years of dearth? Why did you not save the yield of 1 or 2 years against the day of your need? Weeping they made reply, The grain that we put aside during the good years has rotted. Pharaoh, have ye nothing over of the flour of yesterday? The Egyptians, The very bread in the basket rotted. Pharaoh, Why? The Egyptians, Because Joseph willed thus. Pharaoh, O ye fools, if his word hath power over the grain, making it to rot when he desireth it to rot, then also must we die, if so be his wish concerning us. Go therefore unto him, and do as he bids you. The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. Joseph's Brethren in Egypt. The famine, which inflicted hardships first upon the wealthy among the Egyptians, gradually extended its ravages as far as Phoenicia, Arabia, and Palestine. Though the sons of Jacob, being young men, frequented the streets and the highways, yet they were ignorant of what their old home-keeping father Jacob knew, that corn could be procured in Egypt. Jacob even suspected that Joseph was in Egypt. His prophetic spirit, which forsook him during the time of his grief for his son, yet manifested itself now and again in dim visions, and he was resolved to send his sons down into Egypt. There was another reason. Though he was not yet in want, he nevertheless had them go thither for food, because he was averse from arousing the envy of the sons of Esau and Ishmael by his comfortable state. For the same reason, to avoid friction with the surrounding peoples, he bade his sons not appear in public with bread in their hands, or in the accoutrements of war. And as he knew that they were likely to attract attention on account of their heroic stature and handsome appearance, he cautioned them against going to the city altogether through the same gate, or indeed showing themselves altogether anywhere in public, that the evil eye be not cast upon them. The famine in Canaan inspired Joseph with the hope of seeing his brethren. To make sure of their coming, he issued a decree concerning the purchase of corn in Egypt, as follows: By order of the king and his deputy, and the princes of the realm, be it enacted that he who desireth to buy grain in Egypt may not send his slave hither to do his bidding, but he must charge his own sons therewith. An Egyptian or a Canaanite that hath bought grain, and then selleth it again, shall be put to death, for none may buy more than he requireth for the needs of his household. Also, who cometh with 2 or 3 beasts of burden, and loads them up with grain, shall be put to death. At the gates of the city of Egypt, Joseph stationed guards, whose office was to inquire and take down the name of all that should come to buy corn, and also the name of their father and their grandfather, and every evening the list of names thus made was handed to Joseph. These precautions were bound to bring Joseph's brethren down to Egypt, and also acquaint him with their coming as soon as they entered the land. On their journey, his brethren thought more of Joseph than of their errand. They said to one another, We know that Joseph was carried down into Egypt, and we will make search for him there, and if we should find him, we will ransom him from his master, and if his master should refuse to sell him, we will use force, though we perish ourselves. At the gates of the city of Egypt, the brethren of Joseph were asked what their names were, and the names of their father and grandfather. The guard on duty happened to be Manasseh, the son of Joseph. The brethren submitted to being questioned, saying, "Let us go into the town, and we shall see whether this taking down of our names be a matter of taxes. If it be so, we shall not demur. But if it be something else, we shall see tomorrow what can be done in the case." On the evening of the day they entered Egypt, Joseph discovered their names on the list, which he was in the habit of examining daily, and he commanded that all stations for the sale of corn be closed, except one only. Furthermore, even at this station, no sales were to be negotiated unless the name of the would-be purchaser was first obtained. His brethren, with whose names Joseph furnished the overseer of the place, were to be seized and brought to him as soon as they put in appearance. But the first thought of the brethren was for Joseph, and their first concern to seek him. For 3 days they made search for him everywhere, even in the most disreputable quarters of the city. Meantime, Joseph was in communication with the overseer of the station, kept open for the sale of corn, and, hearing that his brethren had not appeared there, he dispatched some of his servants to look for them, but they found them neither in Mizraim, the city of Egypt, nor in Goshen, nor in Ramses. Thereupon he sent 16 servants forth to make a house-to-house search for them in the city, and they discovered the brethren of Joseph in a place of ill fame, and haled them before their master. End of chapter 1, part 10. Chapter 1. Joseph, Part 11 of the Legends of the Jews, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Stephen Escalera. The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. Joseph meets his brethren. A large crown of gold on his head, apparelled in byssus and purple, and surrounded by his valiant men, Joseph was seated upon his throne in his palace. His brethren fell down before him in great admiration of his beauty, his stately appearance, and his majesty. They did not know him, for when Joseph was sold into slavery he was a beardless youth. But he knew his brethren. Their appearance had not changed in aught, for they were bearded men when he was separated from them. He was inclined to make himself known to them as their brother, but an angel appeared unto him, the same that had brought him from Shechem to his brethren at Dothan, and spoke, saying, "These came hither with intent to kill thee." Later, when the brethren returned home and gave an account of their adventures to Jacob, they told him that a man had accused them falsely before the ruler of Egypt, not knowing that he who incited Joseph against them was an angel. It was in reference to this matter, and meaning their accuser, that Jacob, when he dispatched his sons on their second expedition to Egypt, prayed to God, "God Almighty give you mercy before the man." Joseph made himself strange unto his brethren, and he took his cup in his hand, knocked against it, and said, "By this magic cup I know that ye are spies." They replied, "Thy servants came from Canaan into Egypt for to buy corn." Joseph: "If it be true that ye came hither to buy corn, why is it that each one of you entered the city by a separate gate?" The brethren: "We are all the sons of one man in the land of Canaan, and he bade us not enter a city together by the same gate, that we attract not the attention of the people of the place." Unconsciously they had spoken as seers, for the word all included Joseph as one of their number. Joseph: "Verily ye are spies. All the people that come to buy corn return home without delay. But ye have lingered here 3 days, without making any purchases, and all the time you've been gadding about in the disreputable parts of the city, and only spies are wont to do thus." The brethren: "We thy servants are 12 brethren, the sons of Jacob, the son of Isaac, the son of the Hebrew Abraham. The youngest is this day with our father in Canaan, and one hath disappeared. Him did we look for in this land, and we looked for him even in the disreputable houses." Joseph: "Have you made search in every other place on earth, and was Egypt the only land left? And if it be true that he is in Egypt, what should a brother of yours be doing in a house of ill fame, if indeed ye are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob?" The brethren:
We did hear that some Ishmaelites stole our brother and sold him into slavery in Egypt. And as our brother was exceeding fair in form and face, we thought he might have been sold for illicit uses, and therefore we searched even the disreputable houses to find him. Joseph: You speak deceitful words when you call yourselves sons of Abraham. By the life of Pharaoh, ye are spies, and you did go from one disreputable house to another, that none might discover you. The expression, by the life of Pharaoh, might have betrayed Joseph's real feeling to his brethren, had they but known his habit of taking this oath only when he meant to avoid keeping his word later. Joseph continued to speak to his brethren: Let us suppose you should discover your brother serving as a slave, and his master should demand a high sum for his ransom. Would you pay it? The brethren: Yes. Joseph: But suppose his master should refuse to surrender him for any price in the world. What would you do? The brethren: If he yields not our brother to us, we will kill the master and carry off our brother. Joseph: Now see how true my words were, that ye are spies. By your own admission ye have come to slay the inhabitants of the land. Report hath told us that 2 of you did massacre the people of Shechem on account of the wrong done to your sister. And now have ye come down into Egypt to kill the Egyptians for the sake of your brother. I shall be convinced of your innocence only if you consent to send one of your number home and fetch your youngest brother hither. His brethren refused compliance, and Joseph caused them to be put into prison by 70 of his valiant men, and there they remained for 3 days. God never allows the pious to languish in distress longer than 3 days, and so it was a divine dispensation that the brethren of Joseph were released on the 3rd day, and were permitted by Joseph to return home, on condition, however, that one of them remained behind as hostage. The difference between Joseph and his brethren can be seen here. Though he retained one of them to be bound in the prison, he still said, "I fear God," and dismissed the others, but when he was in their power, they gave no thought to God. At this time, to be sure, their conduct was such as is becoming to the pious, who accept their fate with calm resignation, and acknowledge the righteousness of God, for he metes out reward and punishment measure for measure. They recognized that their present punishment was in return for the heartless treatment that they had dealt out to Joseph, paying no heed to his distress, though he fell at the feet of each of them, weeping and entreating them not to sell him into slavery. Reuben reminded the others that they had 2 wrongs to expiate, the wrong against their brother and the wrong against their father, who was so grieved that he exclaimed, "I will go down to the grave to my son mourning." The brethren of Joseph knew not that the viceroy of Egypt understood Hebrew, and could follow their words, for Manasseh stood and was an interpreter between them and him. Joseph decided to keep Simon as hostage in Egypt, for he had been one of the 2, Levi was the other, to advise that Joseph be put to death, and only the intercession of Reuben and Judah had saved him. He did not detain Levi too, for he feared, if both remained behind together, Egypt might suffer the same fate at their hands as the city of Shechem. Also he preferred Simon to Levi, because Simon was not a favorite among the sons of Jacob, and they would not resist his detention in Egypt too violently, while they might annihilate Egypt as aforetime Shechem, if they were deprived of Levi, their wise man and high priest. Besides, it was Simon that had lowered Joseph into the pit, wherefore he had a particular grudge against him. When the brethren yielded to Joseph's demand, and consented to leave their brother behind as hostage, Simon said to them, "Ye desire to do with me as ye did with Joseph." But they replied in despair, "What can we do? Our households will perish of hunger." Simon made answer, "Do as ye will, but as for me, let me see the man that will venture to cast me into prison." Joseph sent word to Pharaoh to let him have 70 of his valiant men to aid him in arresting robbers. But when the 70 appeared upon the scene and were about to lay hands on Simon, he uttered a loud cry, and his assailants fell to the floor and knocked out their teeth. Pharaoh's valiant men, as well as all the people that stood about Joseph, fled affrighted. Only Joseph and his son Manasseh remained calm and unmoved. Manasseh rose up, dealt Simon a blow on the back of his neck, put manacles upon his hands and fetters upon his feet, and cast him into prison. Joseph's brethren were greatly amazed at the heroic strength of the youth, and Simon said, "This blow was not dealt by an Egyptian, but by one belonging to our house." He was bound and taken to prison before the eyes of the other brethren of Joseph. But as soon as they were out of sight, Joseph ordered good fare to be set before him, and he treated him with great kindness. Joseph permitted his 9 other brethren to depart, carrying corn with them in abundance, but he impressed upon them that they must surely return and bring their youngest brother with them. On the way, Levi, who felt lonely without his constant companion Simon, opened his sack, and he espied the money he had paid for the corn. They all trembled, and their hearts failed them, and they said, "Where then is the loving kindness of God toward our fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, seeing that he hath delivered us into the hands of the Egyptian king, that he may raise false accusations against us?" And Judah said, "Verily we are guilty concerning our brother. We have sinned against God, in that we sold our brother, our own flesh. And why do ye ask, Where then is the loving kindness of God toward our fathers?" Reuben spoke in the same way. "Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child, and ye would not hear? And now the Lord doth demand him of us. How can you say, Where then is the loving kindness of God toward our fathers, though you have sinned against him?" They proceeded on their journey home, and their father met them on the way. Jacob was astonished not to see Simon with them, and in reply to his questions they told him all that had befallen them in Egypt. Then Jacob cried out, "What have ye done? I sent Joseph to you to see whether it be well with you, and ye said, An evil beast hath devoured him. Simon went forth with you for to buy corn, and you say, The king of Egypt hath cast him into prison. And now ye will take Benjamin away and kill him too. Ye will bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave." The words of Jacob, which he uttered, "Me have ye bereaved of my children," were meant to intimate to his sons that he suspected them of the death of Joseph and of Simon's disappearance as well, and their reports concerning both he regarded as inventions. What made him inconsolable was that now, having lost 2 of his sons, he could not hope to see the divine promise fulfilled, that he should be the ancestor of 12 tribes. He was quite resolved in his mind, therefore, not to let Benjamin go away with his brethren under any condition whatsoever, and he vouchsafed Reuben no reply when he said, "Slay my 2 sons, if I bring him not to thee." He considered it beneath his dignity to give an answer to such balderdash. "My firstborn son," he said to himself, "is a fool. What will it profit me if I slay his 2 sons? Does he not know that his sons are equally mine?" Judah advised his brethren to desist from urging their father then. He would consent, he thought, to whatever expedients were found necessary, as soon as their bread gave out, and a second journey to Egypt became imperative.
The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. The Second Journey to Egypt. When the supplies bought in Egypt were eaten up, and the family of Jacob began to suffer with hunger, the little children came to him, and they said, "Give us bread, that we die not of hunger before thee." The words of the little ones brought scorching tears to the eyes of Jacob, and he summoned his sons, and bade them go again down into Egypt and buy food. But Judah spake unto him, "The man did solemnly protest unto us, saying that we should not see his face, except our brother Benjamin be with us, and we cannot appear before him with idle pretexts." And Jacob said, "Wherefore dealt ye so ill with me, as to tell the man whether ye had yet a brother?" It was the first and only time Jacob indulged in empty talk, and God said, "I made it my business to raise his son to the position of ruler of Egypt, and he complains and says, Wherefore dealt ye so ill with me?" And Judah protested against the reproach, that he had initiated the Egyptian viceroy in their family relations, with the words, "Why, he knew the very wood of which our baby coaches are made." "Father," he continued, "if Benjamin goes with us, he may indeed be taken from us, but also he may not. This is a doubtful matter, but it is certain that if he does not go with us, we shall all die of hunger. It is better not to concern thyself about what is doubtful, and guide thy actions by what is certain. The king of Egypt is a strong and mighty king.
And if we go to him without our brother, we shall all be put to death. Dost thou not know, and hast thou not heard, that this king is very powerful and wise, and there is none like unto him in all the earth? We have seen all the kings of the earth, but none like unto the king of Egypt. One would surely say that among all the kings of the earth there is none greater than Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Yet the king of Egypt is greater and mightier than he, and Abimelech can hardly be compared with one of his officers. Father, thou hast not seen his palace and his throne, and all his servants standing before him. Thou hast not seen that king upon his throne, in all his magnificence, with his royal insignia, arrayed in his royal robes, with a large golden crown upon his head. Thou hast not seen the honor and the glory that God hath given unto him, for there is none like unto him in all the earth. Father, thou hast not seen the wisdom, the understanding, and the knowledge that God has given in his heart. We heard his sweet voice when he spake unto us. We know not, Father, who acquainted him with our names and all that befell us. He asked also concerning thee, saying, Is your father still alive, and is it well with him? Thou hast not seen the affairs of the government of Egypt regulated by him, for none asketh his lord Pharaoh about them. Thou hast not seen the awe and the fear that he imposes upon all the Egyptians. Even we went out from his presence, threatening to do unto Egypt as unto the cities and the Amorites, and exceedingly wroth by reason of all his words that he spake concerning us as spies. Yet when we came again before him, his terror fell upon us all, and none of us was able to speak a word to him, great or small. Now therefore, Father, send the lad with us, and we will arise and go down into Egypt, and buy food to eat, that we die not of hunger. Judah offered his portion in the world to come as surety for Benjamin, and thus solemnly he promised to bring him back safe and sound, and Jacob granted his request, and permitted Benjamin to go down into Egypt with his other sons. They also carried with them choice presents from their father for the ruler of Egypt, things that arouse wonder outside of Palestine, such as the murex, which is the snail that produces the Tyrian purple, and various kinds of balm, and almond oil, and pistachio oil, and honey as hard as stone. Furthermore, Jacob put double money in their hand to provide against a rise in prices in the meantime. And after all these matters were attended to, he spake to his sons, saying, Here is money, and here is a present, and also your brother. Is there aught else that you need? And they replied, Yes, we need this besides, that thou shouldst intercede for us with God. Then their father prayed, O Lord, thou who at the time of creation didst call enough to heaven and earth when they stretched themselves out further and further toward infinity, set a limit to my sufferings too, say unto them, Enough. God Almighty give you mercy before the ruler of Egypt, that he may release unto you Joseph, Simon, and Benjamin. This prayer was an intercession, not only for the sons of Jacob, but also for their descendants, that God would deliver the 10 tribes in time to come, as he delivered the 2, Judah and Benjamin, and after he permitted the destruction of 2 temples, he would grant endless continuance to the 3rd. Jacob also put a letter addressed to the viceroy of Egypt into the hands of his son. The letter ran thus: From thy servant Jacob, the son of Isaac, the grandson of Abraham, prince of God, to the mighty and wise king Zaphenath-paneah, the ruler of Egypt, peace. I make known unto my lord the king that the famine is sore with us in the land of Canaan, and I have therefore sent my sons unto thee, to buy us a little food, that we may live and not die. My children surrounded me, and begged for something to eat, but alas, I am very old, and I cannot see with mine eyes, for they are heavy with the weight of years, and also on account of my never-ceasing tears for my son Joseph, who hath been taken from me. I charged my sons not to pass through the gate altogether at the same time, when they arrived in the city of Egypt, in consideration of the inhabitants of the land, that they might not take undue notice of them. Also I bade them go up and down in the land of Egypt, and seek my son Joseph. Mayhap they would find him there. This did they do, but thou didst therefore account them as spies. We have heard the report of thy wisdom and sagacity. How then canst thou look upon their countenances, and yet declare them to be spies? Especially as we have heard thou didst interpret Pharaoh's dream, and didst foretell the coming of the famine, are we amazed that thou, in thy discernment, couldst not distinguish whether they be spies or not. And now, O my lord king, I send unto thee my son Benjamin, as thou didst demand of my other sons. I pray thee, take good care of him until thou sendest him back to me in peace with his brethren. Hast thou not heard, and dost thou not know what our God did unto Pharaoh when he took our mother Sarah unto himself? Or what happened unto Abimelech on account of her? And what our father Abraham did unto the 9 kings of Elam, how he killed them and exterminated their armies, though he had but few men with him? Or hast thou not heard what my 2 sons, Simon and Levi, did to the 8 cities of the Amorites, which they destroyed on account of their sister Dinah? Benjamin consoled them for the loss of Joseph. What then will they do unto him that stretcheth forth the hand of power to snatch him away from them? Knowest thou not, O king of Egypt, that the might of our God is with us, and that he always hearkens unto our prayers, and never forsakes us? Had I called upon God to rise up against thee when my sons told me how thou didst act toward them, thou and thy people, ye all would have been annihilated ere Benjamin could come down to thee. But I reflected that Simon my son was abiding in thy house, and perhaps thou wast doing kindnesses unto him, and therefore I invoked not the punishment of God upon thee. Now my son Benjamin goeth down unto thee with my other sons. Take heed unto thyself, keep thy eyes directed upon him, and God will direct his eye upon all thy kingdom. I have said all now that is in my heart. My sons, take their youngest brother down into Egypt with them, and do thou send them all back to me in peace." This letter Jacob put into the keeping of Judah, charging him to deliver it to the ruler of Egypt. His last words to his sons were an admonition to take good care of Benjamin, and not leave him out of their sight, either on the journey or after their arrival in Egypt. He bade farewell to them, and then turned in prayer to God, saying, "O Lord of heaven and earth, remember thy covenant with our father Abraham. Remember also my father Isaac, and grant grace unto my sons, and deliver them not into the hands of the king of Egypt. O my God, do it for the sake of thy mercy. Redeem my sons, and save them from the hands of the Egyptians, and restore their 2 brethren unto them." Also the women and the children in the house of Jacob prayed to God amid tears, and entreated him to redeem their husbands and their fathers out of the hands of the king of Egypt. End of chapter 1, part 11.
Joseph, Part 12 of the Legends of the Jews, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rhonda Fetterman. The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. Joseph and Benjamin. Great was the joy of Joseph when his brethren stood before him, and Benjamin was with them. In his youngest brother he saw the true counterpart of his father. He ordered his son Manasseh, the steward of his house, to bring the men into the palace, and make ready a meal for them. But he was to take care to prepare the meat dishes in the presence of the guests, so that they might see with their own eyes that the cattle had been slaughtered according to the ritual prescriptions, and the sinew of the hip, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, had been removed. The dinner to which Joseph invited his brethren was a Sabbath meal, for he observed the 7th day even before the revelation of the law. The sons of Jacob refused the invitation of the steward, and a scuffle ensued. While he tried to force them into the banqueting hall, they tried to force him out, for they feared it was but a ruse to get possession of them and their asses on account of the money they had found in their sacks on their return from their first journey to Egypt. In their modesty they put the loss of their beasts upon the same level as the loss of their personal liberty. To the average man, property is as precious as life itself. Standing at the door of Joseph's house, they spake to the steward and said, "We are in badly reduced circumstances. In our country we supported others, and now we depend upon thee to support us." After these introductory words, they offered him the money they had found in their sacks. the steward reassured them concerning the money, saying, "However it may be, whether for the sake of your own merits, or for the sake of the merits of your fathers, God hath caused you to find a treasure, for the money ye paid for the corn came into my hand." Then he brought Simon out to them. Their brother looked like a leather bottle, so fat and rotund had he grown during his sojourn in Egypt. He told his brethren what kind treatment had been accorded unto him. The very moment they left the city, he had been released from prison, and thereafter he had been entertained with splendor in the house of the ruler of Egypt. When Joseph made his appearance, Judah took Benjamin by the hand and presented him to the viceroy, and they all bowed down themselves to him to the earth. Joseph asked them concerning the welfare of their father and their grandfather, and they made reply, "Thy servant our father is well, he is yet alive." And Joseph knew from their words that his grandfather Isaac was no more. He had died at the time when Joseph was released from prison, and the joy of God in the liberation of Joseph was overcast by his sorrow for Isaac. Then Judah handed his father's letter to Joseph, who was so moved at seeing the well-known handwriting that he had to retire to his chamber and weep. When he came back, he summoned Benjamin to approach close to him, and he laid his hand upon his youngest brother's head, and blessed him with the words, "God be gracious unto thee, my son." His father had once mentioned the children which God hath graciously given thy servant, and as Benjamin was not among the children thus spoken of, for he was born later, Joseph compensated him now by blessing him with the grace of God. The table was set in 3 divisions, for Joseph, for his brethren, and for the Egyptians. The sons of Jacob did not venture to eat of the dishes set before them. They were afraid they might not have been prepared according to the ritual prescriptions, a punishment upon Joseph for having slandered his brethren, whom he once charged with not being punctilious in the observance of the dietary laws. The Egyptians again could not sit at the same table with the sons of Jacob, because the latter ate the flesh of the animals to which the former paid divine worship. When all was ready and the guests were to be seated, Joseph raised his cup, and pretending to inhale his knowledge from it, he said, "Judah is king, therefore let him sit at the head of the table, and let Reuben the firstborn take the second seat." And thus he assigned places to all his brethren, corresponding to their dignity and their age. Moreover, he seated the brothers together, who were the sons of the same mother, and when he reached Benjamin, he said, "I know that the youngest among you has no brother born by his own mother, next to whom he might be seated, and also I have none, therefore he may take his place next to me." The brethren marveled one with another at all this. During the meal Joseph took his portion and gave it to Benjamin, and his wife Asenath followed his example, and also Ephraim and Manasseh, so that Benjamin had 4 portions in addition to that which he had received like the other sons of Jacob. Wine was served at the meal, and it was the first time in 22 years that Joseph and his brethren tasted of it, for they had led the life of Nazarites, his brethren because they regretted the evil they had done to Joseph, and Joseph because he grieved over the fate of his father. Joseph entered into conversation with his brother Benjamin. He asked him whether he had a brother born of his own mother, and Benjamin answered, "I had one, but I do not know what hath become of him." Joseph continued his questions. "Hast thou a wife?" Benjamin, "Yes, I have a wife and 10 sons." Joseph, "And what are their names?" Benjamin, "Bela and Becher, and Ashbel, Zerah and Naaman, Ehi and Rosh, Muppim and Huppim, and Ard. Joseph: Why didst thou give them such peculiar names? Benjamin: In memory of my brother and his sufferings. Bela, because my brother disappeared among the peoples. Becher, he was the firstborn son of my mother. Ashbel, he was taken away from my father. Zerah, he dwells a stranger in a strange land. Naaman, he was exceedingly lovely. Ehi, he was my only brother by my father and my mother together. Rosh, he was at the head of his brethren. Muppim, he was beautiful in every respect. Huppim, he was slandered. And Ard, because he was as beautiful as a rose. Joseph ordered his magic astrolabe to be brought to him, whereby he knew all things that happen, and he said unto Benjamin, I have heard that the Hebrews are acquainted with all wisdom, but dost thou know aught of this? Benjamin answered, Thy servant also is skilled in all wisdom, which my father hath taught me. He then looked upon the astrolabe, and to his great astonishment he discovered by the aid of it that he who was sitting upon the throne before him was his brother Joseph. Noticing Benjamin's amazement, Joseph asked him, What hast thou seen, and why art thou astonished? Benjamin said, I can see by this that Joseph my brother sitteth here before me upon the throne. And Joseph said, I am Joseph thy brother. Reveal not the thing unto our brethren. I will send thee with them when they go away, and I will command them to be brought back again into the city, and I will take thee away from them. If they risk their lives and fight for thee, then shall I know that they have repented of what they did unto me, and I will make myself known unto them. But if they forsake thee, I will keep thee, that thou shouldst remain with me. They shall go away, and I will not make myself known unto them. Then Joseph inquired of Benjamin what his brethren had told their father after they had sold him into slavery, and he heard the story of the coat dipped in the blood of a kid of the goats. Yes, brother, spoke Joseph. When they had stripped me of my coat, they handed me over to the Ishmaelites, who tied an apron around my waist, scourged me, and bade me run off. But a lion attacked the one that beat me, and killed him, and his companions were alarmed, and they sold me to other people. Dismissed by Joseph with kind words, his brethren started on their homeward journey as soon as the morning was light, for it was a good rule to leave a city after sunrise and enter a city before sundown. Besides, Joseph had a specific reason for not letting his brethren depart from the city during the night. He feared an encounter between them and his servants, and that his men might get the worst of it, for the sons of Jacob were like wild beasts, which have the upper hand at night. The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. The Thief Caught. They were not yet far beyond the city gates when Joseph dispatched Manasseh, the steward of his house, to follow after them and look for the silver cup that he had concealed in Benjamin's sack. He knew his brethren well. He did not venture to let them go too far from the city before he should attempt to force their return. He hoped that the nearness of the city would intimidate them and make them heed his commands. Manasseh therefore received the order to bring them to a halt, by mild speech if he could, or by rough speech if he must, and carry them back to the city. He acted according to his instructions. When the brethren heard the accusation of theft, they said, With whomsoever of thy servants the cup be found, let him die, and we also will be my lord's bondmen." And Manasseh said, "As you say, so it were proper to do. For if 10 persons are charged with theft, and the stolen object is found with one of them, all are held responsible. But I will not be so hard. He with whom the cup is found shall be the bondman, and the rest shall be blameless." He searched all the sacks, and in order not to excite the suspicion that he knew where the cup was, he began at Reuben, the eldest, and left off at Benjamin, the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. In a rage his brethren shouted at Benjamin, "O thou thief and son of a thief! Thy mother brought shame upon our father by her thievery, and now thou bringest shame upon us." But he replied, "Is this matter as evil as the matter of the kid of the goats? As the deed of the brethren that sold their own brother into slavery?" In their fury and vexation, the brethren rent their clothes. God paid them in their own coin. They had caused Jacob to tear his clothes in his grief over Joseph, and now they were made to do the same on account of their own troubles. And as they rent their clothes for the sake of their brother Benjamin, so Mordecai, the descendant of Benjamin, was destined to rend his on account of his brethren, the people of Israel. But because mortification was inflicted upon the brethren through Manasseh, the steward of Joseph, the allotment of territory given to the tribe of Manasseh was torn in two. One half of the tribe had to live on one side of the Jordan, and the other half on the other side. And Joseph, who had not shrunk from vexing his brethren so bitterly that they rent their clothes in their abasement, was punished, in that his descendant Joshua was driven to such despair after the defeat of Ai that he too rent his clothes. Convicted of theft beyond the peradventure of a doubt, the brethren of Joseph had no choice but to comply with the steward's command and return to the city. They accompanied him without delay. Each of them loaded his ass himself, raising the burden with one hand from the ground to the back of the beast, and then they retraced their steps cityward, and as they walked they rapped Benjamin roughly on the shoulder, saying, "O thou thief and son of a thief! Thou hast brought the same shame upon us that thy mother brought upon our father." Benjamin bore the blows and the abusive words in patient silence, and he was rewarded for his humility. For submitting to the blows upon his shoulder, God appointed that his Shekinah should dwell between his shoulders, and he also called him the beloved of the Lord. Joseph's brethren returned to the city without fear. Though it was a great metropolis, in their eyes it appeared but as a hamlet of 10 persons, which they could wipe out with a turn of the hand. They were led into the presence of Joseph, who, contrary to his usual habit, was not holding a session of the court in the forum on that day. He remained at home, that his brethren might not be exposed to shame in public. They fell to the earth before him, and thus came true his dream of the 11 stars that made obeisance to him. But even while paying homage to Joseph, Judah was boiling inwardly with suppressed rage, and he said to his brethren, "Verily, this man hath forced me to come back hither only that I should destroy the city on this day." Guarded by his valiant men on the right and on the left, Joseph addressed his brethren, snarling, "What deed is this that ye have done, to steal away my cup? I know well ye took it in order to discover with its help the whereabouts of your brother that hath disappeared." Judah was spokesman, and he replied, "What shall we say unto my lord concerning the first money that he found in the mouth of our sacks? What shall we speak concerning the second money that also was in our sacks? And how shall we clear ourselves concerning the cup? We cannot acknowledge ourselves guilty, for we know ourselves to be innocent in all these matters. Yet we cannot avow ourselves innocent, because God hath found out the iniquity of thy servants, like a creditor that goes about and tries to collect a debt owing to him. Two brothers take care not to enter a house of mirth and festivity together, that they be not exposed to the evil eye. But we all were caught together in one place, by reason of the sin which we committed in company. Joseph: But if your punishment is for selling Joseph, why should this brother of yours suffer, the youngest, he that had no part in your crime? Judah: A thief and his companions are taken together. Joseph: If you could prevail upon yourselves to report to your father concerning a brother that had not stolen, and had brought no manner of shame upon you, that a wild beast had torn him, you will easily persuade yourselves to say it concerning a brother that hath stolen, and hath brought shame upon you. Go hence, and tell your father, the rope follows after the water bucket. But, continued Joseph, shaking his purple mantle, God forbid that I should accuse you all of theft. Only the youth that stole the cup in order to divine his brother's whereabouts shall remain with me as my bondman. But as for you, get you up in peace unto your father. The Holy Spirit called out, Great peace have they which love thy law. The brethren all consented to yield Benjamin to the ruler of Egypt. Only Judah demurred, and he cried out. Now it is all over with peace, and he prepared to use force, if need be, to rescue Benjamin from slavery. End of chapter 1, part 12. Joseph, Part 13 of the Legends of the Jews, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rhonda Fetterman. The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. Judah pleads and threatens. Joseph dismissed his brethren, and carried Benjamin off by main force, and locked him up in a chamber. But Judah broke the door open and stood before Joseph with his brethren. He determined to use in turn the three means of liberating Benjamin at his disposal. He was prepared to convince Joseph by argument, or move him by entreaties, or resort to force in order to accomplish his end. He spake, Thou doest a wrong unto us. Thou who didst say, I fear God, thou showest thyself to be like unto Pharaoh, who hath no fear of God. The judgments which thou dost pronounce are not in accordance with our laws, nor are they in accordance with the laws of the nations. According to our law, a thief must pay double the value of what he hath stolen. Only, if he hath no money, is he sold into slavery. But if he hath the money, he maketh double restitution. And according to the law of the nations, the thief is deprived of all he owns. Do so, but let him go free. If a man buys a slave, and then discovers him to be a thief, the transaction is void. Yet thou desirest to make one a slave whom thou chargest with being a thief. I suspect thee of wanting to keep him in thy power for illicit purposes, and in this lustfulness thou resemblest Pharaoh. Also thou art like Pharaoh, in that thou makest a promise, and keepest it not. Thou saidst unto thy servants, Bring thy youngest brother down unto me, that I may set mine eyes upon him. Dost thou call this setting thine eyes upon him? If thou didst desire nothing beside a slave, then wouldst thou surely accept our offer to serve thee as bondman instead of Benjamin? Reuben is older than he, and I exceed him in strength. It cannot be but as I say, thou hast a lustful purpose in mind with our brother. Therefore let these words of mine which I am about to speak find entrance into thy heart. For the sake of the grandmother of this lad were Pharaoh and his house stricken with sore plagues, because he detained her in his palace a single night against her will. His mother died a premature death, by reason of a curse which his father uttered in inconsiderate haste. Take heed then, that this man's curse strike thee not, and slay thee. 2 of us destroyed the whole of a city on account of one woman. How much more would we do for the sake of a man, and that man the beloved of the Lord, in whose allotment it is appointed that God shall dwell? If I but utter a sound, death-dealing pestilence will stalk through the land as far as No. In this land Pharaoh is the first, and thou art the second after him. But in our land my father is the first, and I am the second. If thou wilt not comply with our demand, I will draw my sword, and hew thee down first, and then Pharaoh." When Judah gave utterance to this threat, Joseph made a sign, and Manasseh stamped his foot on the ground so that the whole palace shook. Judah said, "Only one belonging to our family can stamp thus," and intimidated by this display of great strength, he moderated his tone and manner. "From the very beginning," he continued to speak, "thou didst resort to all sorts of pretexts in order to embarrass us. The inhabitants of many countries came down into Egypt to buy corn, but none of them didst thou ask questions about their family relations. In sooth, we did not come hither to seek thy daughter in marriage, or peradventure thou desirest an alliance with our sister. Nevertheless, we gave thee an answer unto all thy questions." Joseph replied, "Verily, thou canst talk glibly. Is there another babbler like thee among thy brethren? Why dost thou speak so much, while thy brethren that are older than thou, Reuben, Simon, and Levi, stand by silent?" Judah: "None of my brethren has so much at stake as I have, if Benjamin returns not to his father. I was a surety to my father for him, saying, If I bring him not unto thee, and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever, in this world and in the world to come." The other brethren withheld themselves intentionally from taking part in the dispute between Judah and Joseph, saying, "Kings are carrying on a dispute, and it is not seemly for us to interfere between them." Even the angels descended from heaven to earth to be spectators of the combat between Joseph the bull and Judah the lion, and they said, "It lies in the natural course of things that the bull should fear the lion, but here the two are engaged in equal furious combat." In reply to Judah, when he explained that his greatest interest in Benjamin's safety was due to the pledge he had given to his father, Joseph spoke, "Why wast thou not a surety for thy other brother, when ye sold him for 20 pieces of silver? Then thou didst not regard the sorrow thou wast inflicting upon thy father, but thou didst say, A wild beast hath devoured Joseph, and yet Joseph had done no evil, while this Benjamin has committed theft. Therefore go up and say unto thy father, The rope hath followed after the water bucket." These words had such an effect upon Judah that he broke out in sobs and cried aloud, "How shall I go up to my father, and the lad not be with me?" His outcry reached to a distance of 400 parasangs, and when Husham, the son of Dan, heard it in Canaan, he jumped into Egypt with a single leap and joined his voice with Judah's, and the whole land was on the point of collapsing from the great noise they produced. Joseph's valiant men lost their teeth, and the cities of Pithom and Ramses were destroyed, and they remained in ruins until the Israelites built them up again under taskmasters. Also Judah's brethren, who had kept quiet up to that moment, fell into a rage, and stamped on the ground with their feet until it looked as though deep furrows had been torn into it by a plowshare. And Judah addressed his brethren, "Be brave, demean yourselves as men, and let each one of you show his heroism, for the circumstances demand that we do our best." Then they resolved to destroy Mizraim, the city of Egypt, and Judah said, "I will raise my voice, and with it destroy Egypt." Reuben, "I will raise my arm, and crush it out of existence." Simon, "I will raise my hand, and lay waste its palaces." Levi, "I will draw my sword, and slay the inhabitants of Egypt." Issachar, "I will make the land like unto Sodom." Zebulun, "Like unto Gomorrah I will render it." Dan, "I will reduce it to a desert." Then Judah's towering rage began to show signs of breaking out. His right eye shed tears of blood. The hair above his heart grew so stiff that it pierced and rent the 5 garments in which he was clothed. And he took brass rods, bit them with his teeth, and spat them out as fine powder. When Joseph observed these signs, fear befell him, and in order to show that he too was a man of extraordinary strength, he pushed with his foot against the marble pedestal upon which he sat, and it broke into splinters. Judah exclaimed, "This one is a hero equal to myself." Then he tried to draw his sword from its scabbard in order to slay Joseph, but the weapon could not be made to budge, and Judah was convinced thereby that his adversary was a God-fearing man, and he addressed himself to the task of begging him to let Benjamin go free, but he remained inexorable. Judah then said, "What shall we say unto our father when he seeth that our brother is not with us, and he will grieve over him?" Joseph, "Say that the rope hath followed after the water bucket." Judah, "Thou art a king. Why dost thou speak in this wise, counseling a falsehood? Woe unto the king that is like thee." Joseph, "Is there a greater falsehood than that ye spake concerning your brother Joseph, whom you sold to the Midianites for 20 pieces of silver, telling your father, an evil beast hath devoured him?" Judah, "The fire of Shechem burneth in my heart. Now will I burn all thy land with fire." Joseph, "Surely the fire kindled to burn Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, who did kill thy sons, will extinguish the fire of Shechem." Judah, "If I pluck out a single hair from my body, I will fill the whole of Egypt with its blood." Joseph, "Such is it your custom to do. Thus ye did unto your brother whom you sold, and then you dipped his coat in blood, brought it to your father, and said, An evil beast hath devoured him, and here is his blood." When Judah heard this, he was exceedingly wroth, and he took a stone weighing 400 shekels that was before him, cast it toward heaven with one hand, caught it with his left hand, then sat upon it, and the stone turned into dust. At the command of Joseph, Manasseh did likewise with another stone, and Joseph said to Judah, "Strength hath not been given to you alone. We also are powerful men. Why then will ye all boast before us?" Then Judah sent Naphtali forth, saying, Go and count all the streets of the city of Egypt, and come and tell me the number." But Simon interposed, saying, "Let not this thing trouble you. I will go to the mount and take up one huge stone from the mount, throw it over the whole of Mizraim, the city of Egypt, and kill all therein." Hearing all these words, which they spake aloud, because they did not know that he understood Hebrew, Joseph bade his son Manasseh make haste and gather together all the inhabitants of Egypt, and all the valiant men, and let them come to him on horseback and afoot. Meantime Naphtali had gone quickly to execute Judah's bidding, for he was as swift as the nimble hart. He could run across a field of corn without breaking an ear. And he returned and reported that the city of Egypt was divided into 12 quarters. Judah bade his brethren destroy the city. He himself undertook to raise 3 quarters, and he assigned the 9 remaining quarters to the others, 1 quarter to each. In the meantime Manasseh had assembled a great army, 500 mounted men and 10,000 on foot, among them 400 valiant heroes, who could fight without spear or sword, using only their strong, unarmed hands. To inspire his brethren with more terror, Joseph ordered them to make a loud noise with all sorts of instruments. And their appearance and the hubbub they produced did indeed cause fear to fall upon some of the brethren of Joseph. Judah, however, called to them, "Why are you terrified, seeing that God grants us his mercy?" He drew his sword and uttered a wild cry, which threw all the people into consternation, and in their disordered flight many fell over each other and perished, and Judah and his brethren followed after the fleeing people as far as the house of Pharaoh. Returning to Joseph, Judah again broke out in loud roars, and the reverberations caused by his cries were so mighty that all the city walls in Egypt and in Goshen fell into ruins. The pregnant women brought forth untimely births, and Pharaoh was flung from his throne. Judah's cries were heard at a great distance, as far off as Succoth. When Pharaoh learnt the reason of the mighty uproar, he sent word to Joseph that he would have to concede the demands of the Hebrews, else the land would suffer destruction. "Thou canst take thy choice," were the words of Pharaoh, "between me and the Hebrews, between Egypt and the land of the Hebrews. If thou wilt not heed my command, then leave me and go with them into their land." The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. Joseph makes himself known. Seeing that his brethren were, indeed, on the point of destroying Egypt, Joseph resolved to make himself known to them, and he cast around for a proper opening, which would lead naturally to his announcement. At his behest, Manasseh laid his hand upon Judah's shoulder, and his touch allayed Judah's fury, for he noticed that he was in contact with a kinsman of his, because such strength existed in no other family. Then Joseph addressed Judah gently, saying, "I should like to know who advised him to steal the cup. Could it have been one of you?" Benjamin replied, "Neither did they counsel theft, nor did I touch the cup." "Take an oath upon it," demanded Joseph, and Benjamin complied with his brother's request. "I swear that I did not touch the cup. As true as my brother Joseph is separated from me, as true as I had nothing to do with the darts that my brethren threw at him, as true as I was not one of those to take off his coat, as true as I had no part in the transaction by which he was given over to the Ishmaelites, as true as I did not help the others dip his coat in blood, So true is my oath, that they did not counsel theft, and that I did not commit theft. Joseph: How can I know that this oath of thine, taken upon thy brother's fate, is true? Benjamin: From the names of my 10 sons, which I gave them in memory of my brother's life and trials, thou canst see how dearly I loved him. I pray thee, therefore, do not bring down my father with sorrow to the grave. Hearing these words of abiding love, Joseph could refrain himself no longer. He could not but make himself known unto his brethren. He spake these words to them: Ye said the brother of this lad was dead. Did you yourselves see him dead before you? They answered, Yes. Joseph: Did you stand beside his grave? The brethren: Yes. Joseph: Did you throw clods of earth upon his corpse? The brethren: No. Then Joseph reflected, saying to himself, My brethren are as pious as aforetime, and they speak no lies. They said I was dead because when they abandoned me I was poor, and a poor man is like unto a dead man. They stood beside my grave, that is the pit into which they cast me, but they did not say that they had shoveled earth upon me, for that would have been a falsehood. Turning to his brethren, he said, Ye lie when ye say that your brother is dead. He is not dead. You sold him, and I did buy him. I shall call him, and set him before your eyes. And he began to call, Joseph, son of Jacob, come hither. Joseph, son of Jacob, come hither. Speak to thy brethren who did sell thee. The others turned their eyes hither and thither to the 4 corners of the house, until Joseph called to them, Why look ye here and there? Behold, I am Joseph, your brother. Their souls fled away from them, and they could make no answer. But God permitted a miracle to happen, and their souls came back to them. Joseph continued, Ye see it with your own eyes, and also my brother Benjamin seeth it with his eyes, that I speak with you in Hebrew, and I am truly your brother. But they would not believe him. Not only had he been transformed from a smooth-faced youth into a bearded man since they had abandoned him, but also the forsaken youth now stood before them as ruler of Egypt. Therefore Joseph bared his body and showed them that he belonged to the descendants of Abraham. Abashed they stood there, and in their rage they desired to slay Joseph as the author of their shame and their suffering. But an angel appeared and flung them to the 4 corners of the house. Judah raised so loud an outcry that the walls of the city of Egypt tumbled down. The women brought forth untimely births. Joseph and Pharaoh both rolled down off their thrones, and Joseph's 300 heroes lost their teeth, and their heads remained forever immobile, facing backward as they turned them to discover the cause of the tumult. Yet the brethren did not venture to approach close to Joseph. They were too greatly ashamed of their behavior toward their brother. He sought to calm them, saying, Now be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Even such kind words of exhortation did not banish their fear, and Joseph continued to speak. As little as I harbor vengeful thoughts in my heart against Benjamin, so little do I harbor them against you. And still his brethren were ill at ease, and Joseph went on, "Think you that it possible for me to inflict harm upon you? If the smoke of 10 candles could not extinguish one, how can one extinguish 10? At last the brethren were soothed, and they went up to Joseph, who knew each by name, and weeping he embraced and kissed them all in turn. The reason why he wept was that his prophetic spirit showed him the descendants of his brethren, enslaved by the nations. Especially did he weep upon Benjamin's neck, because he foresaw the destruction decreed for the 2 temples to be situated in the allotment of Benjamin. And Benjamin also wept unto Joseph's neck, for the sanctuary at Shiloh, in the territory of Joseph, which was likewise doomed to destruction. Pharaoh was well pleased with the report of the reconciliation between Joseph and the Hebrews, for he had feared that their dissensions might cause the ruin of Egypt, and he sent his servants to Joseph that they take part in his joy. Also he sent word to Joseph that it would please him well if his brethren took up their abode in Egypt, and he promised to assign the best parts of the land to them for their dwelling place. Not all the servants of Pharaoh were in agreement with their master concerning this invitation to the Hebrews. Many among them were disquieted, saying, "If one of the sons of Jacob came hither, and he was advanced to a high position over our heads, what evil will happen to us when 10 more come hither?" Joseph gave all his brethren 2 changes of raiment, one for use on the ordinary days of the week, and one for use on the Sabbath, for when the cup was found with Benjamin, they had rent their clothes, and Joseph would not have his brethren go about in torn garments. But to Benjamin he gave 5 changes of raiment, though not in order to distinguish him above his brethren. Joseph remembered only too well what mischief his father had caused by giving him the coat of many colors, thereby arousing the envy of his brethren. He desired only to intimate that Mordecai, a descendant of Benjamin, would once be arrayed in 5 royal garments. Joseph presented his brethren, apparelled in their gold and silver embroidered clothes, before Pharaoh, who was well pleased to become acquainted with them when he saw that they were men of heroic stature and handsome appearance. He gave them wagons to bring their families down into Egypt, but as they were ornamented with images of idols, Judah burned them, and Joseph replaced them with 11 other wagons, among them the one he had ridden in his ascension to office, to view the land of Egypt. This was to be used by his father on his journey to Egypt. For each of his brother's children he sent raiments, and also 100 pieces of silver for each, but for each of the children of Benjamin he sent 10 changes of raiment, and for the wives of his brethren he gave them rich garments of state, such as worn by the wives of the pharaohs, and also ointments and aromatic spices. To his sister Dinah he sent silver and gold embroidered clothes, and myrrh, aloes, and other perfumes, and such presents he gave also to the wife and the daughters-in-law of Benjamin. For themselves and for their wives the brethren received all sorts of precious stones and jeweled ornaments, like those that were worn by the Egyptian nobility. Joseph accompanied his 11 brethren to the frontier, and there he took leave of them, with the wish that they and all their families come down to Egypt, and he enjoined upon them besides 3 maxims to be observed by travelers. Do not take too large steps. Do not discuss halakhic subjects, that you lose not your way, and enter the city at the latest with the going down of the sun. End of chapter 1, part 13.
Joseph, Part 14 of the Legends of the Jews, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. Jacob receives the glad tidings. In blithe spirits the sons of Jacob journeyed up to the land of Canaan, but when they reached the boundary line, they said to one another, "How shall we do? If we appear before our father and tell him that Joseph is alive, he will be greatly frightened, and he will not be inclined to believe us." Besides, Joseph's last injunction to them had been to take heed and not startle their father with the tidings of joy. On coming close to their habitation, they caught sight of Sarah, the daughter of Asher, a very beautiful maiden and very wise, who was skilled in playing upon the harp. They summoned her unto them, and gave her a harp, and bade her play before Jacob, and sing that which they should tell her. She sat down before Jacob, and with an agreeable melody she sang the following words, accompanying herself on the harp: "Joseph my uncle liveth, he ruleth over the whole of Egypt, he is not dead." She repeated these words several times, and Jacob grew more and more pleasurably excited. His joy awakened the Holy Spirit in him, and he knew that she spoke the truth. The spirit of prophecy never visits a seer when he is in a state of lassitude or in a state of grief. It only comes together with joy. All the years of Joseph's separation from him, Jacob had had no prophetic visions, because he was always sad, and only when Sarah's words reawakened the feeling of happiness in his heart, the prophetic spirit again took possession of him. Jacob rewarded her therefore with the words, "My daughter, may death never have power over thee, for thou didst revive my spirit." And so it was. Sarah did not die, she entered paradise alive. At his bidding she repeated the words she had sung again and again, and they gave Jacob great joy and delight, so that the Holy Spirit waxed stronger and stronger within him. While he was sitting thus in converse with Sarah, his sons appeared arrayed in all their magnificence, and with all the presents that Joseph had given them, and they spake to Jacob, saying, "Glad tidings, Joseph our brother liveth, he is a ruler over the whole land of Egypt, and he sends thee a message of joy." At first Jacob would not believe them, but when they opened their packs, and showed him the presents Joseph had sent to all, he could not doubt of the truth of their words any longer. Joseph had had a premonition that his father would refuse to give his brethren credence, because they had tried to deceive him before, and it is the punishment of the liar that his words are not believed even when he speaks the truth. He had therefore said to them, "If my father will not believe your words, tell him that when I took leave of him, to see whether it was well with you, he had been teaching me the law of the heifer whose neck is broken in the valley." When they repeated this, every last vestige of Jacob's doubt disappeared, and he said, "Great is the steadfastness of my son Joseph. In spite of all his sufferings he has remained constant in his piety. Yea, great are the benefits that the Lord hath conferred upon me. He saved me from the hands of Esau, and from the hands of Laban, and from the Canaanites who pursued me. I have tasted many joys, and I hope to see more, but never did I hope to set eyes upon Joseph again, and now I shall go down to him and behold him before my death." Then Jacob and the members of his family put on the clothes Joseph had sent, among them a turban for Jacob, and they made all preparations to journey down into Egypt and dwell there with Joseph and his family. Hearing of his good fortune, the kings and the grandees of Canaan came to wait upon Jacob, and expressed sympathy with him in his joy, and he prepared a 3 days' banquet for them. Jacob, however, would not go down into Egypt without first inquiring whether it was the will of God that he should leave the Holy Land. He said, "How can I leave the land of my fathers, the land of my birth, the land in which the Shekinah dwells, and go into an unclean land, inhabited by the slaves of the son of Ham, a land wherein there is no fear of God?" Then he brought sacrifices in honor of God, in the expectation that a divine vision would descend upon him and instruct him whether to go down into Egypt or have Joseph come up to Canaan. He feared the sojourn in Egypt, for he remembered the vision he had had at Bethel on leaving his father's house, and he said to God, "I resemble my father, As he was greedy in filling his maw, so am I, and therefore I would go down into Egypt in consequence of the famine. As my father preferred one son to the other, so I had a favorite son, and therefore I would go down into Egypt to see Joseph. But in this I do not resemble my father. He had only himself to provide for, and my house consists of 70 souls, and therefore am I compelled to go down into Egypt. The blessing which my father gave me was not fulfilled in me, but in my son Joseph, whom people serve and before whom nations bow down." Then the Shekinah addressed Jacob, calling his name twice in token of love, and bidding him not to fear the Egyptian slavery foretold for the descendants of Abraham, for God would have pity upon the suffering of his children and deliver them from bondage. God furthermore said, "I will go down into Egypt with thee," and the Shekinah accompanied Jacob thither, bringing the number of the company with which he entered Egypt up to 70. But as Jacob entertained fears that his descendants would stay there forever, God gave him the assurance that he would lead him forth together with all the pious that were like unto him. And God also told Jacob that Joseph had remained steadfast in his piety even in Egypt, and he might dismiss all doubts from his mind on this score, for it was his anxiety on this account that he had induced Jacob to consider going down into Egypt. He wanted only to make sure of Joseph's faithfulness and then return home, but God commanded him to go thither and remain there. Before Jacob left Canaan, he went to Beersheba, to hew down the cedars that Abraham had planted there, and take them with him to Egypt. For centuries these cedar trees remained in the possession of his descendants. They carried them with them when they left Egypt, and they used them in building the tabernacle. Although Joseph had put wagons at the disposal of his brethren for the removal of his family from Canaan to Egypt, they yet carried Jacob upon their arms, for which purpose they divided themselves into 3 divisions, one division after the other assuming the burden. As a reward for their filial devotion, God redeemed their descendants from Egypt. Judah was sent on ahead by his father to erect a dwelling in Goshen, and also a Bet ha-Midrash, that Jacob might set about instructing his sons at once after his arrival. He charged Judah with this honorable task in order to compensate him for a wrong he had done to him. All the years of Joseph's absence he had suspected Judah of having made away with Rachel's son. How little the suspicion was justified he realized now when Judah in particular had been assiduous in securing the safety of Benjamin, the other son of Rachel. Jacob therefore said to Judah, "Thou hast done a pious, God-bidden deed, and hast shown thyself to be a man capable of carrying on negotiations with Joseph. Complete the work thou hast begun. Go to Goshen, and together with Joseph prepare all things for our coming. Indeed," continued Jacob, "thou wast the cause of our going down into Egypt, for it was at thy suggestion that Joseph was sold as a slave, and also, through thy descendants, Israel will be led forth out of Egypt." When Joseph was informed of the approach of his father, he rejoiced exceedingly, chiefly because his coming would stop the talk of the Egyptians, who were constantly referring to him as the slave that had dominion over them. "Now," thought Joseph, "they will see my father and my brethren, and they will be convinced that I am a free-born man of noble stock." In his joy in anticipation of seeing his father, Joseph made ready his chariot with his own hands, without waiting for his servants to minister to him, and this loving action redounded later to the benefit of the Israelites, for it rendered of none effect Pharaoh's zeal in making ready his chariot himself with his own hands to pursue after the Israelites. The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. Jacob arrives in Egypt. When the Egyptian nobles observed their viceroy completing his preparations to meet his father, they did the same. Indeed, Joseph had issued a proclamation throughout the land, threatening with death all that did not go forth to meet Jacob. The procession that accompanied him was composed of countless men, arrayed in byssus and purple, and marching to the sound of all sorts of musical instruments. Even the women of Egypt had a part in the reception ceremonies. They ascended to the roofs of the houses and the walls of the cities, ready to greet Jacob with the music of cymbals and timbrels. Joseph wore the royal crown upon his head. Pharaoh had yielded it to him for the occasion. He descended from his chariot when he was at a distance of about 50 ells from his father, and walked the rest of the way on foot, and his example was followed by the princes and nobles of Egypt. When Jacob caught sight of the approaching procession, he was rejoiced, and even before he recognized Joseph, he bowed down before him, but for permitting his father to show him this mark of honor, punishment was visited upon Joseph. He died an untimely death before the years of life assigned to him had elapsed. That no harm befell Jacob from a too sudden meeting with him, Joseph sent his oldest son ahead with 5 horses, the second son following closely after him in the same way. As each son approached, Jacob thought he beheld Joseph, and so he was prepared gradually to see him face to face. Meantime Jacob had espied, from where he was seated, a man in royal robes among the Egyptians, a crown upon his head, and a purple mantle over his shoulders, and he asked Judah who it might be. When he was told that it was Joseph, his joy was great over the high dignity attained by his son. By this time Joseph had come close to his father, and he bowed himself down before him to the earth, and all the people with him likewise prostrated themselves. Then Joseph fell upon his father's neck, and he wept bitterly. He was particularly grieved that he had permitted his father to bow down before him but a little while before without hindering it. At the very moment when Joseph embraced his father, Jacob was reciting the Shema, and he did not allow himself to be interrupted in his prayer. But then he said, "When they brought me the report of the death of Joseph, I thought I was doomed to double death, that I should lose this world and the world to come as well. The Lord had promised to make me the ancestor of 12 tribes, and as the death of my son rendered it impossible that this promise should be realized, I feared I had incurred the doom by my own sins, and as a sinner I could not but expect to forfeit the future world too. But now that I have beheld thee alive, I know that my death will be only for the world here below." Such was the manner of Jacob's arrival in Egypt. He came with his whole family, 69 persons they were in all, but the number was raised to 70 by the birth of Jochebed, afterward the mother of Moses, which took place when the cavalcade had advanced to the space between the one and the other city wall. All the males in his family were married men, even Palu and Hezron, the latter of whom was but 1 year old at the time of their migration, and the former but 2 years, had the wives with them that had been chosen for them by their parents. In general, all the sons and grandsons of Jacob married young. Some of them had been fathers at the age of 7. Joseph took some from among his brethren, and presented them to Pharaoh. He chose the weakest of them, that the king might not be tempted to retain them in his service as warriors. And as he did not desire his family to live at close quarters with the Egyptians, and perhaps amalgamate with them, he introduced them as shepherds. The Egyptians worshipped the constellation of the rain, and paid divine honors to animals, and they kept aloof from shepherds. Pharaoh therefore was inclined to grant Joseph's wish, to give them the pasture land of Goshen for their sojourning place, the land that was theirs by right, for the Pharaoh that took Sarah away from Abraham by force had given it to her as her irrevocable possession. In their conversation with Pharaoh the brethren of Joseph made it plain to the Egyptian king that it was not their intention to remain in Egypt forever, it was to be only a temporary dwelling place. Then Joseph set Jacob his father before Pharaoh, and when the king saw him, he said to Og, who happened to be with him at that moment, "Seest thou, thou wast wont to call Abraham a sterile mule, and here is his grandson with a family of 70 persons." Og would not believe his own eyes. He thought Abraham was standing before him, so close was the resemblance between Jacob and his progenitor. Then Pharaoh asked about Jacob's age, to find out whether he actually was Jacob and not Abraham. And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years," using the word pilgrimage in reference to life on earth, which the pious regard as a temporary sojourn in alien lands. "Few and evil," he continued, "have been the days of the years of my life. In my youth I had to flee to a strange land on account of my brother Esau, and now in my old age I must again go to a strange land, and my days have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage." These words sufficed to convince Pharaoh and Og that the man standing before them was not Abraham, but his grandson. When Jacob uttered the words, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage have been few and evil," God said to him, "Jacob, I saved thee out of the hands of Esau and Laban. I restored Joseph unto thee, and made him to be a king and a ruler, and yet thou speakest of few and evil days. Because of thy ingratitude, thou wilt not attain unto the days of the years of the life of thy fathers." And Jacob died at an age 33 years less than his father Isaac's. On going out from the presence of Pharaoh, Jacob blessed the king with the words, "May the years still in store for me be given unto thee, and may the Nile overflow its banks henceforth again and water the land." His words were fulfilled. In order to show that the pious are a blessing for the world, God caused the Nile to rise above its bed and fructify the land of Egypt. End of chapter 1, part 14. Joseph, Part 15 of the Legends of the Jews, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. Joseph's kindness and generosity. Jacob and his family now settled in the land of Goshen, and Joseph provided them with all things needful, not only with food and drink, but also with clothing, and in his love and kindness he entertained his father and his brethren daily at his own table. He banished the wrong done to him by his brethren from his mind, and he besought his father to pray to God for them, that he should forgive their great transgression. Touched by this noble sign of love, Jacob cried out, "O Joseph, my child, thou hast conquered the heart of thy father Jacob." Joseph had other virtues besides. The title, the God-fearing one, borne only by him, Abraham, Job, and Obadiah, he gained by reason of his kindness of heart and his generosity. Whatever he gave his brethren, he gave with a good eye, a liberal spirit. If it was bread for food, it was sure to be abundant enough, not only to satisfy the hunger of all, but also for the children to crumble, as is their habit. But Joseph was more than a helper to his family. As a shepherd pastures his flock, so he provided for the whole world during the years of famine. The people cursed Pharaoh, who kept the stores of corn in his treasure chambers for his own use, and they blessed Joseph, who took thought for the famishing, and sold grain to all that came. The wealth which he acquired by these sales was lawful gain, for the prices were raised, not by him, but by the Egyptians themselves. One part of his possessions, consisting of gold and silver and precious stones, Joseph buried in 4 different places, in the desert near the Red Sea, on the banks of the Euphrates, and in 2 spots in the desert in the vicinity of Persia and Media. Korah discovered one of the hiding places, and the Roman Emperor Antonius, the son of Severus, another. The other 2 will never be found, because God has reserved the riches they hold for the pious, to be enjoyed by them in the latter days, the days of the Messiah. The remainder of Joseph's possessions he gave away, partly to his brethren and their families, and partly to Pharaoh, who put them into his treasury. The wealth of the whole world flowed into Egypt at that time, and it remained there until the exodus of the Israelites. They took it along, leaving Egypt like a net without fish. The Israelites kept the treasure until the time of Rehoboam, who was deprived of it by the Egyptian king Shishak, and he in turn had to yield it to Zerah, the king of Ethiopia. Once more it came into possession of the Jews when King Asa conquered Zerah, but this time they held it for only a short while, for Asa surrendered it to the Aramean king Ben-Hadad, to induce him to break his league with Baasha, the king of the 10 tribes. The Ammonites in turn captured it from Ben-Hadad, only to lose it in their war with the Jews under Jehoshaphat. Again it remained with the Jews until the time of King Ahaz, who sent it to Sennacherib as tribute money. Hezekiah won it back, but Zedekiah, the last king of the Jews, lost it to the Chaldeans, from whom it came to Persia, thence to the Greeks, and finally to the Romans, and with the last it remained for all time. The people were soon left without means to purchase the corn they needed. In a short time they had to part with their cattle, and when the money thus secured was spent, they sold their land to Joseph, and even their persons. Many of them would cover themselves with clay and appear before Joseph and say to him, "O Lord King, see me and see my possessions." And so Joseph bought all the land of Egypt, and the inhabitants became his tenants, and they gave a fifth of their ingatherings unto Joseph. The only class of the people permitted to remain in possession of their land were the priests. Joseph owed them gratitude, for they had made it possible for him to become the ruler over Egypt. The Egyptians had hesitated to make him their viceroy, because they shrank from choosing a man accused of adultery for so high an office. It was the priest that made the suggestion to examine Joseph's torn garment, which his mistress had submitted as evidence of his guilt, and see whether the rent was in front or in back. If it was in back, he would show his innocence. He had turned to flee, and his temptress had clutched him so that the garment tore. But if the tear was in front, then it would be a proof of his guilt. He had used violence with the woman, and she had torn the mantle in her efforts to defend her honor. The angel Gabriel came and transferred the rent from the forepart to the back, and the Egyptians were convinced of Joseph's innocence, and their scruples about raising him to the kingship were removed. As soon as the Egyptians learnt of the advantageous position of the priests, they all tried to prove themselves members of the caste. But Joseph investigated the lists in every archive, and determined the estate of every citizen. The priests were favored in another way. Besides remaining in possession of their land, they received daily portions from Pharaoh, wherefore God said, "The priests that serve idols receive all they need every day. How much more do the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob deserve that I should give them what they need every day?" The rest of the inhabitants of Egypt, who had to part with their land, were not permitted to remain in their native provinces. Joseph removed them from their own cities, and settled them in others. His purpose herein was to prevent the Egyptians from speaking of his brethren derogatorily as exiles, the son of exiles. He made them all equally aliens. For the same reason, God later, at the time of going forth of the Israelites from Egypt, caused all nations to change their dwelling places about, so that the Israelites could not be reproached with having had to leave their home. And finally, when Sennacherib carried the Jews away from their land into exile, it also happened that this king first mixed up all the inhabitants of all the countries of the world. Legends of the Jews, Volume 2, by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. Jacob's Last Wish. In return for the 17 years that Jacob had devoted to the bringing up of Joseph, he was granted 17 years of sojourn with his favorite son in peace and happiness. The wicked experience sorrow after joy. The pious must suffer first, and then they are happy, for all's well that ends well, and God permits the pious to spend the last years of their lives in felicity. When Jacob felt his end approach, he summoned Joseph to his bedside, and he told him all there was in his heart. He called for Joseph rather than one of his other sons, because he was the only one in a position to execute his wishes. Jacob said to Joseph, "If I have found grace in thy sight, bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. Only for thy sake did I come down into Egypt, and for thy sake I spoke. Now I can die. Do this for me as a true service of love, and not because thou art afraid, or because decency demands it. And when I sleep with my fathers, thou shalt bury me in their burying place. Carry me out of the land of idolatry, and bury me in the land where God hath caused his name to dwell, and put me to rest in the place in which 4 husbands and wives are to be buried, I the last of them." Jacob desired not to be buried in Egypt for several reasons. He knew that the soil of Egypt would once swarm with vermin, and it revolted him to think of his corpse exposed to such uncleanliness. He feared, moreover, that his descendants might say, "Were Egypt not a holy land, our father Jacob had never permitted himself to be buried there," and they might encourage themselves with this argument to make choice of Egypt as a permanent dwelling place. Also, if his grave were there, the Egyptians might resort to it when the 10 plagues came upon them, and if he were induced to pray for them to God, he would be advocating the cause of the Lord's enemies. If, on the other hand, he did not intercede for them, the name of God would be profaned among the heathen, who would say, "Jacob is a useless saint." Besides, it was possible that God might consider him, the scattered sheep of Israel, as a sacrifice for the Egyptians, and remit their punishment. From his knowledge of the people, another fear was justified, that his grave would become an object of idolatrous veneration, and the same punishment is appointed by God for the idols worshipped as for the idolaters that worship them. If Jacob had good reasons for not wanting his body to rest in the soil of Egypt, he had equally good reasons for wanting it to rest in the Holy Land. In the Messianic time, when the dead will rise, those buried in Palestine will awaken to new life without delay, while those buried elsewhere will have first to roll from land to land through the earth, hollowed out for the purpose, until they reach the Holy Land, and only then will their resurrection take place. But over and beyond this, Jacob had an especial reason for desiring to have his body interred in Palestine. God had said to him at Bethel, "The land whereon thou liest, to thee I will give it, and to thy seed," and hence he made every endeavor to lie in the Holy Land, and to make sure it would belong to him and his descendants. Nevertheless, he bade Joseph strew some Egyptian earth over his dead body. Jacob expressed these last wishes 3 times. Such is the requirement of good breeding in preferring a request. In the last period of Jacob's life, one can see how true it is that even a king depends upon favors in a strange land. Jacob, the man for the sake of whose merits the whole world was created, for the sake of whom Abraham was delivered from the fiery furnace, had to ask services of others while he was among strangers, and when Joseph promised to do his bidding, he bowed himself before his own son, for it is a true saying, "Bow before the fox in his day, the day of his power." He was not satisfied with a simple promise from Joseph that he would do his wish. He insisted upon his taking an oath by the sign of the covenant of Abraham, putting a hand under his thigh in accordance with the ceremonial custom among the patriarchs. But Joseph said, "Thou treatest me like a slave. With me thou hast no need to require an oath. Thy command sufficeth." Jacob, however, urged him, saying, "I fear Pharaoh may command thee to bury me in the sepulchre with the kings of Egypt. I insist that thou takest an oath, and then I will be at peace." Joseph gave in, though he would not submit to the ceremony that Eliezer had used to confirm the oath that he took at the request of his master Abraham. The slave acted in accordance with the rules of slavery, the free men acted in accordance with the dictates of freedom. And, in a son, that thing would have been unseemly which was becoming in a slave. When Joseph swore to bury his father in Palestine, he added the words, "As thou commandest me to do, so also will I beg my brethren, on my deathbed, to fulfill my last wish and carry my body from Egypt to Palestine." Jacob, noticing the Shekinah over the bed's head, where she always rests in a sick room, bowed himself upon the bed's head, saying, "I thank thee, O Lord my God, that none who is unfit come forth from my bed, but my bed was perfect." He was particularly grateful for the revelation God had vouchsafed him concerning his firstborn son Reuben, that he had repented of his trespass against his father and atoned for it by penance. He was thus assured that all his sons were men worthy of being the progenitors of the 12 tribes, and he was blessed with happiness such as neither Abraham nor Isaac had known, for both of them had had unworthy as well as worthy sons. Until the time of Jacob, death had always come upon men suddenly, and snatched them away before they were warned of the imminent end by sickness. Once Jacob spoke to God, saying, "O Lord of the world, a man dies suddenly, and he is not laid low first by sickness, and he cannot acquaint his children with his wishes regarding all he leaves behind. But if a man first fell sick, and felt that his end were drawing nigh, he would have time to set his house in order." And God said, "Verily, thy request is sensible, and thou shalt be the first to profit by the new dispensation." And so it happened that Jacob fell sick a little while before his death. His sickness troubled him grievously, for he had undergone much during his life. He had worked day and night while he was with Laban, and his conflicts with the angel and with Esau, though he came off victor from both, had weakened him, and he was not in a condition to endure the hardships of disease. End of chapter 1, part 15.